70% of the world's surface is covered in water. It goes from streams to rivers, to estuaries, to seas, to oceans, also ponds and lakes. Now, 2 saints share today as their Saints' Day. And by coincidence, water played a crucial role in both of their lives. The first was St. James, the fisherman, Sea of Galilee. And the second was St. Christopher. Now, legend has it that St. Christopher met a hermit who instructed him in the Christian faith. And then Christopher asked him how he could serve Christ. When the hermit suggested fasting and prayer, Christopher replied he couldn't do that. So the hermit said that because of his size and strength, he could serve Christ by helping people to cross a dangerous river where they were dying trying to cross. The hermit assured him that this service would be pleasing to Christ. After Christopher had been doing this for some time, a little child asked him to help him across the river, take him across the river. During the crossing, the river became swollen, and the child seemed as heavy as lead, so much so that Christopher could hardly carry him. When he finally reached the other side, he said to the child, "I don't think the whole world could have been as heavy on my shoulders as you were." The child replied, "You have not only the whole world on your shoulders, but also him who made it. I am Christ your King, whom you are serving by this work." The child then vanished. And last month, a temporary export bar was placed by Downing Street on a 500-year-old Gothic statuette, thought to be worth millions of pounds. It shows Christopher wading through a river, holding a staff in his left hand, with the figure of the Christ child sitting on his right shoulder. Now, we are about 60% water, and it's essential for our survival. So it's not really surprising that the word water appears nearly 500 times in the Bible, starting in Genesis 1 right through to Revelation 22. And if you add derivatives such as waters, waterfalls and watery, it's over 650 times. Now today we're going to look at an important episode in which water played a particularly prominent role, namely the occasion when Jesus talked with a Samaritan woman at Jacob's well. The account is in John chapter 4 and beginning to read at verse 1. The Pharisees heard that Jesus was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John, although in fact it was not Jesus who baptized them, but his disciples. When the Lord learned of this, he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about the 6th hour. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. how can you ask me for a drink? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. Sir, the woman said, you've nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his flocks and herds? Jesus answered, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water I give him will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give him will become in him a spring of living water, welling up to eternal life. The woman said to him, Sir, give me this water, so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water. He told her, Go, call your husband and come back. I have no husband, she replied. Jesus said to her, You are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you've had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you said is quite true. Sir, the woman said, I can see you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem. Jesus declared, Believe me, woman, a time is coming when you will worship the Father, neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming, and has now come, when true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for they are the kind of worshippers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshippers must worship in spirit and in truth. The woman said, I know that Messiah, called Christ, is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us. Then Jesus declared, I who speak to you am he. Just then the disciples returned and were surprised to find him talking with a woman. But no one asked, What do you want? Or why are you talking with her? Then, leaving her water jar, the woman went back to the town. I'd like to pause there. We will come back there in a moment. And just look at some interesting points in the account so far. Now, there do seem to be quite a lot of obstacles to this conversation taking place at all. First, the route that Jesus chose. Actually, there were 3 routes between Galilee and Jerusalem. The western one along the coast, the eastern one along the Jordan Valley, and the middle one along the road that ran north through passes in the mountains. Now, this was the fastest and most direct, but it required travelling through Samaria. Now, there was antagonism between Jews and Samaritans, which sometimes caused tension along this route. But because it was quicker, it was the route commonly taken by Jews going to Jerusalem, except the strictest Jews, who would have avoided this route and taken a longer route to avoid becoming ceremonially unclean. Now, just to clarify the situation between Jews and Samaritans, Samaria was part of the northern kingdom that had rebelled against the Assyrians in 722 BC. In order to put down rebellious provinces, it was the Assyrians' practice to exile the leaders to areas of Assyria and then in their place resettle people on their land from other parts of the realm. These foreigners intermarried with the Israelite population that was still in and around Samaria. And as recorded in 2 Kings 17, these Samaritans at first worshipped the idols of their own nations. But, being troubled with lions, they supposed it was because they'd not honoured the God of that territory. The Jewish priest was therefore sent to them from Assyria to instruct them in the Jewish religion. Now they were instructed, but only from the books of Moses, and not the rest of the Jewish Bible, e.g. the prophets. But even so, they still retain many of their idolatrous customs. Because the Israelites, inhabitants of Samaria, had intermarried with the foreigners and adopted their idolatrous religion, Samaritans were universally despised by the Jews. And things were made even worse, because Samaria became a place of refuge for all the outlaws of Judea. The Samaritans willingly received Jewish criminals and refugees from justice, people who violated the Jewish laws, and those who'd been excommunicated found safety in Samaria. This greatly increased the hatred which existed between the two nations. Now, the second point is that the woman was at the well on her own. Now, normally it was a team effort. The women would go together to draw water and make it something of a social occasion too. Now, the well was not a scaled-up version of the wishing well in Fairhurst precinct, which has at Christmas time, which has a handle to turn. No, a deep well like this one would have had some rope and pulley arrangement, and some of the women would raise the water by holding the rope and walking away from the well, and I guess others would have unloaded the filled water jars. And from what I've read, I don't think there was a bucket on the end of the rope and then the water poured from it. As far as I can see, it seems the jars themselves were lowered down the well somehow. At that point too, Jesus was on his own, because the disciples had gone to buy food. And it's hard to imagine a conversation which had gone into this lady's personal life could have taken place with onlookers, including the disciples. So I would say it was definitely a one-to-one situation for this to have occurred. Now the third one is, the woman was at the well at the 6th hour. Now that's not quite as definitive as one might think, because as it were, there were 2 times a day, depending on which time scale you used. The Roman clock started at midnight, like ours, so the 6th hour would have been between 5 and 6 in the morning, which isn't likely from the general context of the passage, of the account. So if you look at the Jewish clock, that started at 6 a.m, and that would have put the 6th hour at about midday, and that makes more sense in the context of the account. But normally, water was drawn in the evening, so actually, whichever clock you choose, it was still an unusual time for the lady to be there. And fourthly, the woman came to this well despite apparently other water sources being nearer to her home. Now there seems to have been plenty of research into where Sychar was. People looked at how place names have changed with time and other factors, and the majority view seems to be that it was probably on the site of the present-day town of Asgard, which is near the ancient ruins of Shechem. Now we know where Jacob's well was because it's still there today. It's fed by springs and dug out to a depth of more than 100 feet. And it's right alongside the main road, So it was a logical place for Jesus to stop and rest. However, it's about half a mile away from Asgard, and there are other sources of water nearer. So it does seem that the woman walked past these other sources to get to Jacob's well. And fifthly, Jesus spoke to a woman he just did not know. And in that culture, it was very unusual for a man to initiate a conversation with a woman he didn't know. So it's quite intriguing that the conversation took place at all. Now there are some particularly interesting points in the conversation itself. For example, I'll almost reiterate a bit, but Jesus asked the woman to give him a drink, despite the fact that Jews did not normally use utensils used by the Samaritans. And it's quite an extraordinary thing for Jesus to have done. And the Samaritan woman was stunned because she said, "You are a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" It's just an amazing thing for Jesus to have done. Completely out of kilter with the cultural norms of the day. And next, the word living in the phrase living water. It has two meanings. Normally, it referred to flowing water from a river or stream, as opposed to standing water from a pond or well. And this is the way the woman uses it. But Jesus uses the word ambiguously, giving the word a deeper meaning, i.e. water that imparts life, indeed eternal life. Now this usage appears in Jeremiah, where the Lord is referred to as the spring of living water. But as the Samaritan Bible did not include the prophets, presumably the woman was not familiar with this other deeper meaning. Now the mountain that she's talking about in verse 20, where the Samaritans were supposed to worship, was Mount Gerizim. Now, it was not just any old mountain, but played an important part in the history of the Israelites. In Deuteronomy, it says that the Lord, through Moses, commanded the Israelites to perform a ceremony there, along with Mount Ebal, which is on the opposite side of the valley. And this was to be after they crossed the Jordan and occupied the land. The business about worship on Mount Gerizim was a major source of controversy between Jews and Samaritans. It goes back to their history and differences in their, I'd say Pentateuch, the books they had at the beginning of the Bible. There were some 6,000 differences between the Samaritan and the Jewish versions. Most are minor variations in the spelling of words or grammatical constructions, but others were more significant. In particular, the uniquely Samaritan commandment to construct an altar on Mount Gerizim. Because of this, like their forefathers in the northern kingdom, the Samaritans refused to recognize Jerusalem as the centre of worship. Rather, in the 4th century BC, the Samaritans built a temple on the slopes of Mount Gerizim. And then it was destroyed in 128 BC by Hyrcanus, the Jewish king. But nevertheless, the Samaritans maintained that Mount Gerizim was a proper place to worship, while Jews insisted on worshipping in Jerusalem. Now, moving on, the question I'd like us all to think about now is, why did John record this conversation? Or record this episode? It's the longest single recorded conversation that Jesus had with an individual. Now I suggest there are lots of good reasons, but I'm going to outline 3 in no particular order. The first, it shows that Jesus was not hidebound by cultural restraints. For example, he seemed to treat the Samaritans as ordinary people, which the Jews would not have normally have done. And of course, he started a conversation with a woman he didn't know, which was also never heard of in those days. The second is the value of the teaching itself, particularly the concept of Jesus giving living water, which was a symbol of his Father in heaven. And also he declared to her that he was the Messiah. Now the third lies further on, and we need to go back to verse 28. Do you remember? Then leaving her water jar, the woman went back to the town and said to the people, "Come, see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Christ?" They came out of the town and made their way towards him. Then there's a conversation Jesus had with the disciples. And going on to verse 39, many of the Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. He told me everything I ever did. So when the Samaritans came to him, they urged him to stay with them, and he stayed 2 days. And because of his words, many more became believers. They said to the woman, "We no longer believe this just because of what you said. Now we've heard for ourselves, and we know this man really is the Saviour of the world." So the key point here with the Samaritans is saying, we're believing, we believed you, we believed when you told us, but now we've really heard it for ourselves, and we believe he really is the Saviour of the world. So they saw Jesus as the Messiah based on his words, and they didn't need miracles. There's no record in this passage of Jesus working miracles, which other people seem to have needed to be convinced that Jesus was the Christ. Now, this is as far as it goes in the Bible. But there's oodles of information on the internet about tradition in the Orthodox Church, which actually I found very, very interesting. So I'll share a few of them with you. First, the name by which she, the Samaritan woman, is known. We're not given her name in the Bible, I should have said earlier. So we're not even told her name in the Bible, but she's given a name in the Orthodox Church, and in Greek it's Fotini, and that means luminous one. And next, she's venerated as a saint, and she has a saint's day. In the Eastern Orthodox and Eastern Catholic churches, her saint's day is February the 26th. But in the Greek Orthodox Church, she has 2 saints' days, February the 26th and the 5th Sunday after Easter, which is known as the Sunday of the Samaritan. And finally, as I said, we know where Jacob's well is, or was then and is now. It's the same well. And there's been a church built over it. And access to the well is via the crypt of that church. And that church is dedicated to Saint Fotini. So, she changed from being a woman who went to the well on her own to a lifestyle which led to her being venerated as a saint. Wow, what a transformation!